Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now. Juan Carlos Ferrero just said something that has the entire tennis world doing a double take. In a recent interview, the former coach of Carlos Alcaraz was asked about the possibility of working together again. And instead of giving the expected diplomatic answer about how he's moved on, how Alcaraz is in good hands, how they're both focused on their current situations, Ferrero didn't close the door. In fact, he basically left it wide open. Never say never. That's what Ferrero said when asked about a potential reunion with Alcaraz. 3 words that might seem innocuous, but are absolutely loaded with meaning when you understand the context, the history, and the current situation both of them are in. Because here's what makes this so interesting. Alcaraz is currently working with Juan Carlos Ferrero's successor, and while the results have been good, there are questions. There are whispers. There are people in tennis circles wondering if Alcaraz has plateaued slightly, if he's missing something he had when Ferrero was in his corner. And now Ferrero is publicly acknowledging that a reunion isn't off the table. That's not just news. That's a potential earthquake in men's tennis. Because if Alcaraz and Ferrero get back together, it changes everything. The dynamic, the coaching landscape, the trajectory of Alcaraz's career. And the fact that Ferrero is even entertaining the idea publicly means something is happening behind the scenes that we're not fully seeing yet. This isn't just a former coach being nostalgic. This is a chess move, and we need to figure out what game is being played. Juan Carlos Ferrero has opened the door to potentially reuniting with Carlos Alcaraz, saying never say never when asked about coaching the Spanish star again, and the implications are massive for the future of tennis. In this comprehensive breakdown, we explore why Ferrero's comments are so significant, what it would mean for Alcaraz's career if they teamed up again, and why the timing of these remarks might not be coincidental. We dive deep into the history of their partnership, analyze what went right and what led to their split, and examine whether Alcaraz has been missing Ferrero's influence in his recent performances. From tactical analysis to psychological insights, we cover every angle of this developing story. We also look at what Ferrero has been doing since the split, whether his other players would be affected by an Alcaraz reunion, and what the current coaching situation looks like for both parties. Plus, we break down the political and professional dynamics that could make a reunion complicated or impossible, and we predict whether this is actually going to happen or if it's just speculation. If you've been following Alcaraz's career and wondering why things feel slightly different now compared to when Ferrero was coaching him, this analysis will give you the answers you've been looking for. Let's start with the history, because you can't understand the significance of Ferrero's comments without understanding what these two accomplished together and why they split in the first place. Ferrero started working with Alcaraz when Carlos was just a teenager. This wasn't an established star hiring a big-name coach. This was a former Grand Slam champion taking a chance on a kid with enormous potential, but zero professional resume. Ferrero saw something special in young Alcaraz and decided to invest his time and expertise in developing that talent. And it worked. Really worked. Under Ferrero's guidance, Alcaraz went from promising junior to teenage professional to top 100 player to top 10 player to Grand Slam champion to world number 1. That trajectory is insane. Most players take a decade to climb that ladder. Alcaraz did it in basically 3 years. Ferrero was there for all of it. He was there for Alcaraz's first ATP title, his first Masters 1000, his breakthrough at the US Open, his ascent to number 1. Every major milestone in Alcaraz's career happened with Ferrero in his corner. They built something special together, and everyone in tennis could see it. The partnership worked because Ferrero understood Alcaraz's game and personality perfectly. He knew when to push and when to back off. He knew how to harness Alcaraz's natural aggression and creativity while adding structure and tactical awareness. He was the perfect coach for that stage of Alcaraz's development. But then they split, and the official explanation was professional and amicable. Alcaraz wanted to try a different approach, work with someone new, see if a fresh perspective could take him to the next level. Ferrero understood and supported the decision. They remain on good terms. No drama, no hard feelings, just a professional parting of ways. That's the public story, anyway. And it might even be true. But there's always more going on behind the scenes than what gets said in press releases. And Ferrero's recent comments suggest that maybe the door was never fully closed. Maybe both sides have been thinking about this possibility more than they've let on publicly. So, what's changed? Why is Ferrero talking about this now? Well, look at where both of them are. Alcaraz is still winning and still one of the best players in the world, but there's been something slightly off lately. He's had some early losses in tournaments he should have dominated. His consistency has wavered a bit. He's still playing great tennis, but there are moments where you watch him and think, something's different. Something's not quite clicking the way it used to. And a lot of people in tennis have noticed this. Commentators mention it delicately. Analysts discuss it in careful terms. But the underlying question is always the same. Has Alcaraz been as good since splitting with Ferrero as he was when they were together? The stats are actually kind of interesting on this. Alcaraz's win percentage is still excellent. His Grand Slam results are still good. But if you dig into the details, there are some differences. More 5-set matches, more comebacks from behind, rather than dominant straight-set wins. More matches where he looks vulnerable before pulling it out. None of that is disastrous. Alcaraz is still Alcaraz, but it's enough to make you wonder if something was lost when Ferrero left. Some edge or advantage or intangible quality that made the difference between being great and being utterly dominant. Meanwhile, Ferrero has been working with other players at his academy. He's had some success, but nothing that comes close to what he achieved with Alcaraz, which makes sense. Lightning doesn't strike twice. Finding another generational talent like Alcaraz is basically impossible. But you have to think Ferrero sometimes watches Alcaraz's matches and wonders what could have been if they'd stayed together. So you've got Alcaraz possibly missing what Ferrero brought to the partnership. And you've got Ferrero possibly missing the thrill of coaching a player at the absolute pinnacle of the sport. Put those two things together, and suddenly a reunion starts to make sense. But there are complications. Big ones. First, there's the current coach. Alcaraz is working with Samuel Lopez now, and while we might have some questions about the results, it's not like Lopez is doing a bad job. Alcaraz is still winning tournaments. He's still competing for Grand Slams. Firing your coach when things are going reasonably well is awkward at best and potentially destructive at worst. Second, there's the optics. If Alcaraz goes back to Ferrero, it looks like an admission that the split was a mistake, that he needed Ferrero more than Ferrero needed him. That's not a great look for someone who's supposed to be the future of tennis, the next dominant force. It suggests uncertainty and indecision at a time when Alcaraz should be projecting total confidence. Third, there's the question of whether going backwards is ever really the right move. In sports, in business, in life, there's this general principle that you shouldn't try to recreate the past. What worked before might not work again. The circumstances have changed. Both people have changed. Trying to recapture lightning in a bottle often ends in disappointment. But then again, sometimes reunions work. Sometimes taking a break makes you appreciate what you had. Sometimes you need to try something else to realize that the original partnership was special and worth preserving. So, which is it in this case? Is a Ferrero-Alcaraz reunion a smart move that could take Carlos to even greater heights? Or is it a backward step that would signal doubts and weakness? Honestly, the answer probably depends on why they do it and how they structure it. If Alcaraz goes running back to Ferrero out of desperation after some bad losses, that's not a strong position. That's panic. That's likely to create more problems than it solves. But if they approach it strategically, if they both recognize that the partnership worked exceptionally well and that current circumstances make it possible to work together again under better terms, that's different. That's two professionals making a calculated decision to maximize their chances of success. And that might be what Ferrero is hinting at with his comments. He's not saying, "I'd love to coach Carlos again. Please hire me back." He's saying, "Never say never," which suggests openness to the right opportunity under the right circumstances. It's a signal that he's receptive if Alcaraz wants to have that conversation, but he's not desperate for it. That's a smart position to take. It keeps his options open without making him look desperate. It plants the seed in Alcaraz's mind without putting pressure on him. It's the kind of savvy media move you'd expect from someone who's been in professional tennis for decades. Let's talk about what would actually change if they reunited. Because the question isn't just whether it happens, but what difference it would make if it did. Tactically, Ferrero knows Alcaraz's game better than almost anyone. He was there when Carlos developed his signature shots. He helped build the foundation of his playing style. He understands Alcaraz's instincts and tendencies at a level that takes years to develop. That kind of knowledge is incredibly valuable, especially in big matches against top opponents, where small tactical adjustments can make the difference. Psychologically, there's a comfort factor with Ferrero that Alcaraz might not have with anyone else. They've been through the wars together. They've celebrated the biggest wins and processed the toughest losses. That history creates a bond and a level of trust that's hard to replicate with a new coach. When things get tough in a match, having someone in your corner who's been through it all with you before can be huge. Strategically, Ferrero might see things that others miss because he knows what Alcaraz is capable of at his absolute best. He knows what peak Alcaraz looks like, and he can identify when Carlos is falling short of that standard. That's valuable feedback that only comes from intimate knowledge of a player over time. But there are potential downsides too. Sometimes you need a fresh perspective. Sometimes you've learned everything you can from one coach and need someone new to challenge you in different ways. Alcaraz is still developing as a player. He's still evolving. Maybe what he needs now is different from what he needed when he was 18 or 19. There's also the risk of falling into old patterns. If you work with the same coach using the same methods, you might plateau. You might stop improving because you're too comfortable. The discomfort of working with someone new might be exactly what pushes you to the next level. These are the trade-offs Alcaraz would need to consider. And they're not easy questions with obvious answers. Reasonable people could disagree about whether a reunion with Ferrero is the right move for his career. But the fact that Ferrero is publicly leaving the door open suggests he thinks it would be the right move. He's essentially saying, "I believe I can still help Carlos. I believe we can still accomplish great things together. If he wants to explore that, I'm interested." That's significant. Because Ferrero has nothing to gain from saying this if he doesn't mean it. He's got a successful academy. He's got other players to coach. His legacy is secure as a former Grand Slam champion and the coach who helped develop one of the best young players in tennis. He doesn't need Alcaraz, but he wants it, or at least he's open to it. And that tells you something about how he views their potential together. Now let's consider the timing. Why is Ferrero saying this now? What's happening that makes this the right moment to open this door publicly? Well, we're at an interesting point in Alcaraz's career. He's established himself as a top player, but he hasn't quite cemented himself as the dominant force everyone expected him to become. Sinner has emerged as a genuine rival who might actually be better right now. Djokovic, despite his age, is still winning big tournaments. Alcaraz is in the mix, but he's not separating himself from the pack the way many thought he would by this point. That creates an opening for a conversation about what changes might be needed. If Alcaraz was dominating everything, winning 3 Grand Slams a year, clearly the best player in the world, there'd be no reason to consider a coaching change. But the current situation is more ambiguous. There's room for the argument that something different might help, and Ferrero might be seeing that opening and deciding this is the right time to signal his availability, not aggressively, not desperately, but just making it known that he's there if needed. There's also the possibility that Ferrero knows something we don't. Maybe there have been private conversations. Maybe Alcaraz has reached out informally to test the waters. Maybe Ferrero's comments aren't speculative, but are actually laying the groundwork for something that's already in motion behind the scenes. That's pure speculation, obviously. But in professional sports, public comments often serve purposes beyond their surface meaning. When someone as media-savvy as Ferrero makes a point of saying never say never about something as significant as reuniting with Alcaraz, it's worth considering what he's really communicating and to whom. The other interesting angle here is how this affects the broader coaching landscape in tennis. If Ferrero and Alcaraz do reunite, it sends a message to other coaches and players. It says that sometimes the best partnerships are worth preserving even if you take a break. It validates the idea that loyalty and history have value beyond just chasing the new and shiny. On the flip side, if they don't reunite despite this door being opened, that also sends a message. It says that Alcaraz is committed to moving forward rather than backwards, that he's confident in his current situation and sees his future differently than his past. Either outcome is interesting and meaningful for the sport. What's also worth considering is what this means for the other players Ferrero is currently coaching. If he goes back to Alcaraz, does that mean less time and attention for them? Does it mean they're essentially second-tier priorities? That's a real concern that would need to be addressed in any reunion scenario. Ferrero has built a successful academy with multiple talented players. Abandoning them to go all in with Alcaraz again could create problems and bad feelings. So, any reunion would need to be structured in a way that doesn't completely disrupt his other commitments. Maybe that means Alcaraz becomes a special project that Ferrero works with during certain periods while maintaining his academy responsibilities. Maybe it means bringing in additional coaching help to share the load. Maybe it means being honest with his other players about the reality that coaching a potential all-time great takes precedence sometimes. These are solvable problems, but they're real considerations that would need to be worked through. Let's also think about this from Alcaraz's perspective. What would he be gaining and losing by going back to Ferrero? The gains are pretty obvious. Familiarity, trust, proven results, tactical knowledge, comfort. Ferrero helped turn him into a Grand Slam champion. There's a track record of success that's hard to argue with. The losses are more subtle. Independence, the perception of moving forward, the fresh perspective that comes with new coaching, the ability to say he's succeeded with multiple coaches rather than being dependent on one person. For a young player trying to establish himself as the best in the world, that independence and forward momentum matter. Going back to your old coach can feel like admitting you couldn't make it work without them. That's not necessarily true, but perception matters in sports. On the other hand, if the reunion leads to better results, if Alcaraz starts dominating the way he did in his best periods with Ferrero, then all those perception issues disappear. Winners get to write the narrative. If it works, the story becomes Alcaraz was smart enough to recognize what worked and had the courage to make the difficult decision to reunite with Ferrero. But if it doesn't work, if the results don't improve or even get worse, then the narrative becomes Alcaraz panicked and made a backwards move that proved he doesn't have the confidence to succeed without Ferrero. That's brutal, but that's how sports media works. So there's significant risk either way. Stay with the current situation and risk never quite reaching your potential. Go back to Ferrero and risk looking weak and dependent if it doesn't immediately produce better results. That's the decision Alcaraz is facing, whether he admits it publicly or not. And Ferrero's comments have now made that decision a public topic that will be discussed and analyzed endlessly until there's resolution one way or another. You have to wonder if Ferrero thought through all these implications before making his never say never comment. Probably he did. He's been in professional tennis long enough to understand how the media works and how comments get interpreted and amplified, which means he said it deliberately, knowing it would create exactly this kind of speculation and discussion. And if he did that deliberately, it's probably because he wants Alcaraz to be thinking about this possibility. He wants the idea of a reunion to be present in Carlos's mind as he navigates the next phase of his career. That's either a caring former coach who genuinely believes he can still help his former student, or it's a savvy professional making a play to get back into the most prestigious coaching position in tennis, or it's some combination of both. Probably it's both. People's motivations are rarely simple. What we know for certain is that the door is open. Ferrero has made that clear. Now it's up to Alcaraz to decide whether he wants to walk through it, and the entire tennis world will be watching to see what he decides. Because this isn't just about a coaching change. It's about the direction of Alcaraz's career, the coaching dynamics in professional tennis, and the larger question of whether you can ever really go home again or if the past should stay in the past. The smart money says they'll at least have a serious conversation about it at some point. Whether that conversation leads to a reunion or confirms that they're better off on separate paths remains to be seen. But the fact that it's even a possibility now is significant in itself. Ferrero has opened the door. Alcaraz has to decide whether to walk through it, and whatever he decides will tell us a lot about who he is as a person and a player, and what kind of career he wants to have. The next chapter of the Alcaraz story might very well involve a return to where it all started, or it might involve Carlos proving he can reach the highest levels without going back to his original coach. Either way, it's going to be fascinating to watch unfold. One more thing worth considering. What if this isn't really about coaching at all? What if Ferrero's comments are more about maintaining a relationship and keeping communication open rather than seriously pursuing a coaching reunion? Sometimes in professional sports, people say things to maintain connections and preserve possibilities without actually intending to follow through. Never say never is the perfect phrase for that. It sounds meaningful, but commits to nothing. It keeps the door open without actually walking through it. Maybe Ferrero just wants to ensure that he and Alcaraz stay in each other's orbits professionally. That if Alcaraz ever needs advice or perspective, Ferrero is available. That their relationship continues even if the formal coaching arrangement doesn't resume. That's valuable in itself and doesn't require a full reunion. But based on how these things usually work in tennis, based on Ferrero's history and Alcaraz's current situation, this feels like more than just maintaining a connection. This feels like genuine possibility being floated to see how people react. And the reaction has been significant, which probably tells both of them something useful about how a reunion would be received. Do you think Alcaraz should reunite with Ferrero, or is going backwards never the right move? Would a reunion make Alcaraz even better, or is he better off continuing to forge his own path? Drop your opinion in the comments, and let's debate whether never say never means this is actually going to happen, or if it's just Ferrero keeping his options open. Subscribe so you don't miss any updates on this developing story. If this reunion actually happens, it'll be one of the biggest coaching stories in recent tennis. Hit that like button if you think the Ferrero-Alcaraz partnership was special and deserves a second chance.